So I just saw a post where a young white woman is upset and crying because she's understanding how easy they have it in China, and she doesn't understand why, as Americans, we have to work so hard just to have so little.
Racism would be the answer. So this all goes back to what they call drained pool politics. Once integration became the law of the land with cases like Brown v. Board, a lot of white people moved to get rid of public services and goods like swimming pools. And that meant they had fewer resources. They had fewer third places. And it was fine back in the day because they would just pay. They would pay to go to country clubs, which is why there's a proliferation of country clubs in this country right now. But they put all those kinds of things that used to be public services behind a paywall because then they could just say, well, you can't pay, or this is a private club. It doesn't matter if you can pay. We're not going to allow you in. It's our choice. It's not a public service. It's not a government run thing. Just so Black people wouldn't have access. But over time, the cost of these services rose higher and higher until most white people cannot afford them. But it's not just that. I mean, this idea goes all the way back to things like Social Security. Do you know white people refused to vote it through back during the New Deal until two groups of people were not eligible? Domestic labor, so that would be like maids, and agriculture workers who didn't own the land. So in other words, if you were a sharecropper, like most Black people in the South, or a maid, like the women, you couldn't get Social Security. Once they put those provisions in, all of a sudden, they could have it all day long. White people in this country have always been obsessed with the idea of Black people not having things. And that's why they're in the mess that they're in. It's kind of nice to be able to say what I want on here. The reason why countries, the Scandinavian ones, Denmark and Sweden and whatnot, have such great policies is in part because those countries are homogenous, or mostly so. And they're not trying to investigate who's benefiting from the free child care and the universal health care and all that. They are moving on. We could have a great standard of living in this country, but white people are so obsessed, so angry at the idea other people who are not white are going to have that same great standard of living. They would rather live in squalor. It's why the Affordable Health Care Act got gutted. The utter terror that people who don't look like you are going to be able to live decently. What you pay for. I mean, politicians have tried to convince white voters for years. This is in their interest. It was in their interest to not have to pay for these goods and services. And now you fell for it. They convinced you it was communist or socialist to have a decent standard of living, to have the taxes that you pay go to something other than endless war, to actually go towards the maintenance of the nation and making our lives better. But, I hope you enjoy it. Rather than letting everybody have a turn with the ball, you've decided to pop the ball and you're complaining, there's no ball, there's no ball. Indeed, there's not. And if we got a ball tomorrow and you saw the Black people and others playing with it, you'd probably pop it again. So there's a direct correlation. It's not that Black problems are just starting to suddenly leak over and affect white people. It's that the intentional negative economic and social policies white people put in place to oppress Black people have now rebounded on them. Everything people complain about nowadays. How come there are no more third spaces? How come we don't have anywhere to go but work and school? How come we can't afford property? How come this and how come that? All of those have a direct correlation to post-integration policies and choices. Why is college so expensive? Racism. Black people started going and they raised the tuition out of all scope. It used to be practically free to go to school. How come I can't find a decent job? Racism. The minute Black people integrated those unions for the factories that have been operating in this nation for decades, and Black people could only be non-unionized workers or just unskilled labor, the minute we finally broke into the unions, that is when they began migrating out of cities like Detroit, first into the South for white cities, and then eventually overseas. You thought you were winning. And the hollowing out of Chicago and Detroit and etc. don't just affect Black people. The reverberations of that crisis have affected the entire Midwest, and look at the condition of the Rust Belt today. The hole you dig for somebody else will be the one you fall in. That's literally biblical. If people had focused on trying to get the whole standard of living for the country up, even if they had just focused on their own ends, but not tried to punish anyone else, this whole country would be in a better position today. And now look, I hope this serves as a valuable lesson to you. It probably won't. Because that's why the last election went the way it went. They are still trying to convince you somebody else is to blame for the problems that are self-engineered And they tried to convince you that by punishing someone else, the mysterious boogeyman stole your cheese. And if you beat him up, if you cut his wages, if you deport him, you'll get your cheese back. It's not true. This learning curve is getting steeper and steeper, though. I am genuinely interested to see what happens on Red Note next. I think this will be the first time a lot of Americans have unfettered, unpropagandized access to so many citizens from a nation we've been taught is bad. That inherently they're doing things wrong and that they're oppressed and we need to help them and save them. This will be the first time a lot of Americans had that much direct contact. And the puzzle pieces are starting to click into place. You know, this might be the making of something. We will see. That's it. Like and follow for more. As long as you can. I hope it's longer than we think.